Yes, we have theme music now. Alright, so we will get into this real quick and start talking about the progressive era. My apologies if you hear my daughter crying in the background. I got her down for a nap a little bit ago. Not a little bit ago. I got her to sleep just a little bit ago. She's been up for a little while. So we will get you started here with the progressive era, and hopefully it won't be too terrible. It's a very exciting time in U.S. history. It's one of my favorite eras to really kind of take a look at, and mostly, my bias towards Teddy Roosevelt, just because his story is so interesting, it's so captivating from the type of leader that he is, and just kind of his rise through the ranks and the whole situation. So, once again, just kind of reiterating a few things. This is designed to help create the overall thematic movements that are going on inside the chapter, making sure that you guys are understanding the big time stories and making the big time connections within this. So that is really the main purpose behind the video. So hopefully this does help out. So diving right in here. The biggest thing to understand, okay, and as we've looked at several things and watching an episode of The Men Who Built America, you guys taking a look at this diagram here, really it's kind of the blending of the struggles that exist with industrialization and urbanization within the big cities, but then also it's really kind of how you blend government interaction within the struggles that are developing within those two concepts. So, really out of all of this, you have the political, social, and economic effects from this progressive movement. You have a very big push and a very big series of changes that are going to happen from this era that are going to come out of all these big problems that we've been discussing, especially going in through the Gilded Age. But to kind of keep in mind a few things and to really kind of focus yourself on the overall thematic question. Okay, so just kind of thinking of how successful were the progressive reforms with respect to industrial conditions, urban life, and politics, but then also evaluate the effectiveness of the progressive era reformers in the federal government in bringing about those reforms and changes to the national level. So not necessarily looking at just the local district, statewide reforms and things like that, but also think of the big picture. Was this an era where we had the big, huge reforms? Was it really worthy of the title progressive era, or was it kind of just kind of a mask because of the political party? That's a legitimate debate, and that's a legitimate question, and we will actually discuss this in class this week as we're doing our flipped weeks. So really kind of think about these things as you're taking notes and as you are reading your chapters, and this will come back up in class, so just kind of pay attention to that. The origins of progressivism. So we've talked about the greenbacks. We talked about the whole push with the gold standard and everything else. That really is where it's going to come from. It's going to come from the farmers. It's going to come from the smaller individual, or the quote unquote smaller individuals, the individuals who really are looked upon as the have-nots, so to speak. It really is kind of the grand debate, and we're having this debate now. With the Democratic debate that's on tonight, and then with the Republican debate that was on earlier in the week, we have this huge dilemma, or this huge debate between the haves and have-nots that are existing inside the United States. So this is something that we really have to kind of realize that this is a never-ending problem, and it's going to keep popping back up. And if you look at the big socioeconomic concerns, socioeconomic issues, the wealth gap, working conditions, immigration, these should sound familiar to what we are seeing in these debates and what's happening. The only thing that's really kind of lacking from this would be like national security. But even now with like ISIS going on and everything else, it's a legitimate thing that's going to start to pop up as we continue to progress through here, especially as we start talking about Woodrow Wilson and World War I and things like that. So all things to just throw out there, and we will all need to think about this as we keep moving forward. Okay, attitudes, motivations. It's kind of off here. I'm going to adjust this real quick. Okay, there we go. All right, so attitudes and motives behind this whole situation here. It's really all surrounding the trust, and yes, the lovely picture of Lady Liberty being held by a King Kong ape type dude. There we go. my creativity. What we've got going on is really kind of understanding who believes, who's jumping on board with the progressives. And the progressives, like, their whole goal is to have social and economic justice, to fix the problems, to make things more equitable, to make things more even and fair amongst the masses. And that really is something that you can kind of drawing from politics today as well, right? Just kind of reiterating a few things. The rise of the middle class, kind of jumping down here a little bit. You have urban middle class, you put in the professional class. This is a growing divide. Okay, and this is a huge issue because at this point, right, you have a flourishing middle class. You can make an argument that middle class today is a little bit smaller than what it was at this point in history. You had wealthy middle class individuals, and you had struggling middle class individuals. So there was even kind of a flourishing, overarching middle class during this era. Really, that it's something that you don't really see a whole lot today. I mean, you have a lot of people who are struggling, lower on the socioeconomic status kind of chart there. Then you have some on the middle class chart, and you have a few on the upper class. So I mean, it's a growing issue, and it's a growing divide within the country, to where you have the have and have-nots even within the middle class. So that's some sort of it's a pretty odd situation. Not really something that exists in a lot of different countries, but it's a sign that the country is expanding. I mean, at this point in history, no country in the world has expanded at this rate, and again, just basically exploded in terms of like technology, building new buildings, bridges, roads, all those things, with the upheaval and development of steel, oil, electricity, all those things. So this is a very booming time for the United States. So just don't forget that, and kind of how this is all kind of coming together. Okay, manifestations. Sorry about this, guys. My letters are getting off here. My words. Sorry about that. Okay. So kind of jumping back in here and kind of introducing a few names here. Prominent politicians who are really going to start to play an impact within the United States political spectrum here. Roosevelt, La Follette, Bryan, and Wilson. Okay, so and Woodrow Wilson. And I guess you could throw Taft in there, although we'll kind of show you guys what goes on with Taft and Roosevelt here in a little bit. Hopefully, through your reading, you'll have a little bit of a sense of what did happen. And it's kind of interesting, to say the least. So basically what you have here, right, a fundamental philosophical approach here. Okay, you have pragmatism, you have scientific management. These are two basic views on how laws and how the government worked at this point. Okay, now it's all really kind of going around democratic values, okay, honest government, and just laws. Now, there are always two sides to this perspective, right? I mean, you have a good side, you have a bad side. What is honest? What is good? I mean, that is it's a two-sided spectrum question. What is good to one group may not be good to another. What is fair and balanced to one group may not be fair and balanced to the next. So it's kind of a dilemma. It's kind of a situation that you've got to rectify here. And how you rectify it is through these two philosophical approaches. Okay, one being the pragmatist. Okay, pragmatism. It's the idea that you got to be practical. Okay, you've got to experiment with laws. You've got to try different things. You've got to make efforts to fix the problems. Now, if you pass a law, are you going to fix everything? Absolutely not. No, you're not going to address every single problem. You're not going to fix it completely, but should that be a reason to hold you back? So kind of thinking about that. Many people who are pragmatists will say no, right? You do not hold back. I mean, even if there's a law that can help fix some of the problem, is it worth it? Okay, it's a legitimate debate, and we're even having a debate with some of the laws today with gun violence and gun laws and everything else, but we will not get into that in this video. Scientific management is another flip side of this. So F.W. Taylor is it's a very interesting article, his Principles of Scientific Management. He's wanting to be more data-driven, more practical in terms of like how to adjust and make laws and things like that. It really more is focused around you need to basically eradicate the problem. You need to completely fix the problem if you're going to pass the laws. Be very specific and be very data-driven in terms of what you are wanting to accomplish and things of that nature. So two very different viewpoints in how this this era should go. And you even have this to some extent today in our political spectrum. So I'm really interested in political philosophy, so hopefully I'm not crazy boring you and stuff like that with this, but it's just really fascinating to me. It's just kind of cool to understand where we are today and kind of how it compares to back then. Because let's face it, history just keeps repeating itself. So moving on. Okay, Muckrakers. All right, these guys are pretty interesting, and we will be checking these guys out this week. Week and a half or so, kind of looking at a couple different examples here with the Yellow Press and investigative journalism and things of that nature. If you look down here at the list, and I'm not going to spend a crazy ton of time with this because we'll spend some time in class investigating and everything else. But bottom line is what a muckraker is basically you're airing out the muck. And it sounds like what it is. You're basically airing out everybody's dirty laundry. You're writing articles, you're writing books, you're writing great works of literature in many cases, and you are basically letting everything fly. You are not holding anything back, and you are just thrashing someone and trying to demonstrate how awful they are. And this has been the case for kind of demonstrating the crazy divides in poverty, okay, with Jacob Riis. Just skipping around here, Tarbell, and kind of how they are pointing out Standard Oil and what they're kind of sucking it up with, and kind of where it's getting pretty dirty in terms of their business consulting and things of that nature. Going further on, you can even talk about Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. It's pointing out the meat factory. It's a very disgusting book. I had to read that in college my junior year and write a paper on it. And we will actually read some excerpts in class, and the excerpts in class are not even the most graphic. So, yeah, if you guys are interested, definitely check out that book if you want to feel a little bit squeamish. So, fun stuff. If you're vegetarian, don't read that book. Yeah, not a good idea. All right, political reforms. All right, municipal and state. So focusing a little bit more on the local level first. All right, now I say local level, but it really does have an overall United States nationwide impact. So voter participation, and then also the municipal reforms here. So we'll start off with voter participation. One of the biggest things that comes out of this is direct primaries and then direct election of senators. Then we'll talk about initiatives and referendums and recall elections and things like that. We'll get into that here in just a second. Kind of with this chapter, there's a lot of government talk, so it's kind of a way to kind of segue into next year when you guys are taking your government classes. Direct primaries, it's kind of what we're going to be seeing here coming up here over the next couple months in terms of the Democratic and Republican primaries. Basically, when you go from state to state. Now, by the time Indiana has our primary, pretty much everything is going to be decided. The one exception to that, the most recent exception to that, was in 2008, whenever we had the presidential election between John McCain and Barack Obama. Okay, now just because you have direct primaries does not mean it's all at once. Okay, so Iowa's always the place that starts us off, and it's not even really a part of the primary process. It's a caucus. Now it helps to decide who's going to get supports from delegates and things of that nature, but it's a little bit more complex than that, and we can discuss that further in class with our in-class activities. Direct election of senators, basically popular vote. At one point, it was not done that way. All right, many governors actually appointed their senators and who was going to represent them in Congress and things of that nature. So this is all coming back to the 17th Amendment is what's going to push and change this way of doing things. All right, it's going to be directly connected to people's votes. Okay, big change. All right, initiatives and referendums. Basically, with what's going on with here is it's giving more direct power to the United States people. Or your state or local individuals who are voting on these things. With recall elections, you can kick somebody out of office if they turn out to be a crook, which a lot of people did experience this early on before the age of background checks and things like that. You'd basically elect crooks who were involved in money laundering and things like that. So probably not good individuals to have running your country, but Some people may disagree. Initiatives. If you were wanting to see something passed, right? So like the Proposition 8 situation, or the passing of the marijuana smoking stuff out west. Those were initiatives, right? That was voted for and by the people. So it's basically deciding, right? Should, in the case of Proposition 8, should same-sex marriage be allowed out in California? Okay, so these are the types of concepts that can be voted on by the public. If for some reason there's a hugely political or politicized issue that governors and state officials are very, very reluctant to kind of take a stand on, they will pass it to the people, and people can directly decide, as opposed to just being represented by the governor or their state legislatures. So something to think about there. Municipal reform, okay, kind of taking things out of the hands of a few individuals, right? So government controlling public utilities and actually getting forward with like sanitation, things of that nature, creating commissioners, city managers, and things like that, to where there's actually more political persuasion that is involved within the more municipal areas. Okay, so smaller local districts. It's all basically giving us, the United States people, a bigger and stronger voice. Okay, so it's a big push. So things that are changing, where things were, not that way, as you can remember back from the Gilded Age in the previous chapters, hopefully. Social reforms. Okay, temperance and prohibition. Yeah, that worked out great. The Prohibition era, 2/3 of all states prohibited the sale of alcohol. It was considered just this horrible thing, and it was responsible for crime rates and everything else. It is changed. Okay, so I mean, it's not going to stick around, obviously. I mean, with all, hopefully, if you guys are watching the playoff games, you see a beer commercial every once in a while and things like that. So clearly, it was a flop. Continuing forward, social welfare, okay, educational reform, juvenile detention reforms, improved conditions for tenement houses, factories, things of that nature. Then we'll get down to labor. For the social welfare, education reform, kind of things that start to be required, right? We talked about people being tested for governmental positions. So, I mean, you need to know what you're talking about. This is actually a big push in this era where people have to take a test to show that, hey, you know what you're talking about. So, yeah, you can teach our kids. You don't want somebody who has no idea what history in the United States was like, and then just start teaching you guys U.S. history. It's a good thing that comes from this. And if you look down here, juvenile detention reforms. You're not going to go to prison for like skipping school and stuff like that. That is a change because at one point they just kind of jump people together and put them in big boy jail. At this point, we realize that that's not the case, and probably not the best idea to do for multiple reasons, but we won't go into all of those. Improved conditions in tenement houses. So, I mean, you guys should know, I mean, tenement houses were basically governmental provided homes. Usually they were apartments. Okay, so they're actually improving and getting a standard level of what is acceptable inside the United States for where families can live. Okay, even if they are impoverished, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable is something to kind of make sure you're understanding what's going on. Okay. Oh, labor. Okay, National Child Labor Committee, getting rid of child labor. All right, so actually making it more stringent in terms of like requiring students to be of a certain age before they can actually come and work, creating compulsory education to where you must attend school and things of that nature, to where you are no longer going to be able to skip school and go work in the factories. Sorry about that, guys. The bulldog is not happy. Anyways, okay, so back to this. All right, continuing forward. During the workday, this is something that's going to be a big juggernaut case. All right, so Lochner versus New York. The 10-hour workday versus the 8-hour workday. And kind of what is acceptable and kind of shrinking things down. So, I mean, you have people wanting an 8-hour day. You have factories and everything else wanting to stay on 12-hour days. Now, I mean, if you've ever worked 12-hour days, and teachers often do, it can be very exhausting. Okay, and factories, especially. I mean, if you know anybody that works in healthcare, 12-hour days it drains you. So this was kind of a bargaining. All right, so it was basically kind of a deal that was reached between the two parties, that the new standard for a standard work day would be 10 hours. So it wasn't 8, wasn't 12, kind of meeting in that middle, but it's getting things going. All right, now, once unions become more powerful, once unions start to develop their own kind of mindsets with shrinking down the hours that are required for the day, it will end up going to the 8 hours, obviously, since that's what we're at today. Continuing forward, working conditions and safety. Kind of what you have going on there is there's going to be a requirement that's going to come out of this era, that there has to be a certain level of safety that is provided for workers when they are at work. Now, that being said, it's going to come at a cost. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, and show you a couple pictures from here, and we will actually, as a part of the assignment, you'll have a couple of, just one video that shows, kind of documents the whole situation and kind of the abysmal failure that was the fire department, was the company, was the justice system, a complete breakdown for these teenage girls that were killed in this terrible, terrible fire. So I won't say too much about that, but we will be watching and checking out a few bits of information about those things. All right, here we go to the man. Basically, all right, Teddy Roosevelt. All right, and kind of how he comes onto the deal. All right, as we saw in the video, kind of he takes over from being vice president after the assassination, and he basically comes up with this viewpoint of the square deal. He's going to approach the United States citizens and say, all right, we've got to attack these 4 basic things, these 4 basic concepts, and he's going to steamroll them through Congress. Okay, he's going to legitimately kind of use the bully pulpit. He's going to bully his way into the hearts and minds of Americans. But people loved him, so we have that. Roosevelt's 3 C's, all right? Control of corporations, conservation of natural resources, then also consumer protection. So these 3 things are key components for Teddy Roosevelt and kind of what he wants to do inside of America. Not necessarily letting corporations have free reign, wanting to protect consumers, wanting to protect their best interests, then also save what we have inside the United States, save what we have for the world, and really start that whole process and like combating things like natural resource depletion. So it was actually kind of ahead of his time when it comes to that. Okay, National Reform Movement, kind of where he is in terms of like what he's wanting to accomplish and what he does choose to tackle in some of his early points. Okay, labor. All right, the coal strike, and you guys will check this out in one of our Flip Classroom activities, so just kind of hang tight on that one. I don't want to give too much with that because I do want you to have kind of a fresh look at it whenever we start discussing it in our small group stuff. So just kind of hang tight with that one. Trust busting. He's basically really trying to draw out good versus bad trusts. Now, that is kind of a key fundamental argument here. All right, characteristics of bad trusts would be basically ignoring laws, trying to throw insane amounts of money into elections to try to infiltrate and influence the political process. This is something that he wanted to break up. This is something that he wanted to create to basically ensure that there was not going to be any monopolies established. Okay, so the Northern Securities, 1904. These are going to be huge entities to prevent monopolies from being formed. So he is really looking out for consumers in this sense, because if there's ever a monopoly, okay, they can charge crazy amounts of money for their products because you're going to have no choice but to buy that product, especially if you need the product. So it's kind of think of it today. If this stuff had not existed, do you think there could be one single oil company for the United States? Hands down, there could. Okay, there would be one company providing gasoline. They'd charge whatever the heck they wanted, and then that's what you had to pay because most people have to drive to get to work. So that's something to kind of think about. Railroad regulation. Okay, Elkins Act, Hepburn Act. These two things are responsible for helping to decrease the amount of charges that railroads can actually demand from clients, to where they will actually be able to afford rail rates, to where they can actually ship their goods to and from market and actually make a solid living with this. So this is huge for middle class and lower income families. Huge for this era, because many people were not brave enough to take on these issues. Teddy Roosevelt was one that really could not be bought by the big business owners and things like that. So that is one reason I really do kind of look up to him, because he came from wealth, but he also knew that things were stacked in favor of super wealthy individuals at this point in history, and he was gutsy enough to attack it and fix the problem. So I definitely applaud him. He's one of my favorites. Okay, national reforms. Impact of the Jungle, Pure Food and Drug Act, and then also the Meat Inspection Act. Hopefully you guys have learned a little bit about the jungle in the past, but we'll hold off on that one so we can check out the article, and I want to get your reactions, because it's some pretty disgusting stuff. Conservation, increased scope of Forest Reserve Act, and kind of focusing in on preserving America. Okay, kind of preserving the beauty that we have going on here, especially if you go out west towards California, the national forests and things of that nature. You see a lot more of this. You see a lot of forests that are just amazingly beautiful, and when we're in a point in history where we have companies and corporations going out there to want to start new mines and start process of starting up new factories and things like that. You don't want to deplete all of that stuff. And Teddy Roosevelt knew that. He wasn't crazy. I mean, he would allow people to develop land and everything else to a certain point. But there were certain sections where he just kind of really felt strongly about it. And he was a big wilderness guy. He liked to go hunting. He liked to be involved outside and things like that. So he really was kind of the first conservation president that we've ever had. Okay, kind of shifting forward here. Okay, the dude that takes over after Teddy Roosevelt. Okay, Taft. Here's sort of his policies. Okay, here's his viewpoint on a lot of things to kind of think about and kind of break things down with. And as we kind of break them down on our assignment this week, we'll talk more about them. But he's really kind of the one who is seen to be kind of the baby of Teddy Roosevelt. And I'll show you a little cartoon here in a second on the next slide. But if you check this out, I mean, he has a lot of things that he really is kind of in line with Teddy Roosevelt on. He's wanting to break the trusts. He's wanting to continue on the path of conservation. He's wanting to keep tariffs low. But things will change. And that will change pretty much immediately after Teddy Roosevelt hands over the reins. This is the guy who Teddy Roosevelt hand selects to kind of be his successor. He hand selects this guy, and it's going to turn out much different than what Teddy Roosevelt ever envisioned. So we'll kind of shift over here. As you can see, here's little baby Taft, and he's being handed over here to Teddy. But then if you look over here, Teddy's looking through the window, and he sees it's basically a crappy mess over here. Evidently, he's like a crazy cat lady or something. Yeah, it's the politics of the era. We'll go with that. Make your opponent look like a crazy cat lady, and you will win the election. So there we go. All right, the rift that happens. Okay, keeping tariffs low. Okay, is something that really kind of sparks the fuel here. Okay, this is what creates a huge rift in the Republican Party, and arguably develops the modern day Republican, was in this situation. Okay, the tariff issue, all right, and hopefully you guys remember what a tariff is. Okay, it's basically a tax on imports. He's designing this to basically give huge tax cuts for the larger corporations, because those are the only ones that are really kind of dealing in trade and negotiations and things of that nature. So this basically decreasing the tariff, okay, is actually giving a big tax break towards the larger corporations. And that is one thing that the progressives get very angry over, because they're wanting to have a progressive tax system where the upper class pays more than the lower class. This is seen as kind of catering to the super wealthy. Okay, that's not where it all ends. Okay, Secretary of the Interior. Teddy Roosevelt actually goes through this process, and he's actually keeping a lot of these individuals from Teddy Roosevelt's cabinet. And basically, he's having a dispute in terms of like who's selling land in Alaska, basically what the natural resources are within Alaska. Taft gets angry. Taft fires him. Okay, it just cuts him loose. Teddy Roosevelt gets frustrated as he's seeing all this kind of from the outside, and all this is that is going on. Backtracking on everything. Okay, so this is just going to keep that in mind. So we get to a point of midterms in 1910. All right, at this point, seeking election again, Taft comes onto the stage, but Teddy Roosevelt is not going to allow him to be the only individual going for re-election. Now, this is the first case where you have a politician who is basically walking away from politics, stepping aside, because you could have kept running if you're Teddy Roosevelt, and you would have kept winning too. But he decides that, you know what's best for America, let's hand over the reins of the Republican Party to the future, and let's get things rolling for the progressives. Taft is seen as kind of the backstabber of the progressive era, but he's going to run again as a Republican nonetheless. Teddy Roosevelt, he runs as a third-party candidate. Okay, and that's not the only third-party candidate, because you will see Debs here running in the Socialist Party, running as an actual socialist. Okay, and this is actually something of note. Socialists at this point, we had like over 150 delegates serving that were declared socialists. So this is actually nothing that's crazy, especially for this era. Now, I mean, at this point in history, we have a Democratic Socialist who's running for president, and people are frustrated with that and kind of freaked out by that concept. But it's nothing that's crazy new for us. So just kind of throwing that one out there. All right, but if you look here, right, with Roosevelt and the Progressive Bull Moose Party, the concept of him running as this third-party candidate had a lot of people excited in terms of like what the opportunities were and what could happen and everything else. And it's kind of interesting with the results of what happened. Wilson, okay, I mean, obviously, if you split any type of political party, and you are more closely aligned with one over the other, you will split that ticket. So, like just today, like an example, people were concerned about Donald Trump running as a third-party candidate. If, let's say, just hypothetical, Ted Cruz gets the nomination and Donald Trump runs as a third-party candidate and Hillary Clinton is a Democratic nominee, okay, just throw that one out there. Hillary Clinton would win the presidency. Why? They split the Republican ticket. Some of the Republicans will vote for Trump. Some Republicans will stay with more Republicans will stay with Ted Cruz. But that's the situation. You're not going to get a whole lot of independents that are going to swing towards, or enough that will swing towards one of those two more conservative candidates. So Hillary will take that split vote and go to the presidency. Okay, that's precisely what happened. Okay, and I'll show you this. With only 42% of the vote, here's kind of the landscape here. Notice, Teddy Roosevelt does better in this election than the Republican nominee Taft. What does that say if you were the chairman of the Republican Party? Yeah, probably shooting yourself in the foot. Okay, but we have the rise of Woodrow Wilson. Okay, we're getting close on this, guys. I'm not going to take too much longer. Getting really close. He is the schoolmaster. He's considered to be this very snooty, very wealthy, very intellectual president. He is the professor in chief, is what a lot of people call him, to kind of poke fun and just kind of show a few things. He's very, very well educated. Okay, he's a schoolmaster of politics. He knows many things about literature and things of that nature. So he's very, very well read and very, very well versed. A lot of people actually saw that as kind of a negative for him because he was so book smart that he couldn't relate to the average Joe. But I can't see that from all of the books that I've read about him and everything else. He's kind of an interesting president. But he's also kind of an example one of the first modern Democrats to kind of come through the political process. So, kind of throwing this out here real quick, a couple things to kind of note with where he stood politically. Okay, once again, break up the trusts. Right, he's a very big proponent of no monopolies existing. If you check this out, okay, the Federal Reserve Act. Actually having something that's there to kind of help spur the economic growth. To if there's a situation where people are not buying anything, let's affect interest rates. Have that power of regulation. And then also, okay, tariff reduction. Focus on a graduated income tax. He starts the process, okay, of actually getting to the point of having wealthy individuals pay more. Okay, so that's something to note. Continuing on further down, Federal Trade Commission and also the Clayton Antitrust Act. It's kind of the set cornerstone of how business is conducted, of what the rights of unions are, what the rights of business owners are. So kind of establishing this whole code, this set law of how you conduct yourself. A couple of things are listed there, but you guys will read about those within your reading, and these will come up a bit later. So hopefully if you guys are printing out these notes, just make sure that you are kind of taking your time and checking out these different acts and breaking things down. And we'll do that together in class as well, but I just want to make sure that you kind of do take a little bit of note about those. So just kind of pay attention to those. The regressive progressives. These are real things. Eugenics. So I mean, talking about family history. It's pretty sickening between eugenics and then also nativism. It's basically just a way to keep people in subordinate positions. Talking about Darwinism, basically survival of the fittest. Maybe if it is not in your genes, you should not be left alone. That you should not get assistance. But at the same time, it's very contradicting with what real true progressives believe, and then what these guys were pushing it on others. Some people are born to be a burden on the rest. Forced sterilization. They actually believe that if you are in a position of poverty, if you are not making money, if you're not doing well, then you should not exist, and that you're kind of inhibiting the developmental process of mankind. So it's pretty sad, but it's something that a lot of people, well, I wouldn't say a lot, several people thought should happen. So, yeah. Nativism, we've talked about that before, but it's kind of coming out again for immigration. Literacy tests for immigrants, making sure you can speak English. This is really kind of the whole starting of it. They should speak American. I'm not going to speak Spanish and things like that. It's a change. It's starting to develop, and it's what's going to stick around and still be around today. Woodrow Wilson was not really for it. He was one who really thought that immigrants were a strong point for United States history and things like that. I mean, we're all immigrants in the simplest terms to kind of understand that. And so whenever they really passed this literacy test for immigrants, he vetoed it, but Congress overturned it. Kind of a dark side of this era. Okay, this very last thing, right, to kind of throw at you. I love that quote. If we teach today as we taught yesterday, we rob our children of tomorrow. So, yeah, love that quote. Local state reforms, kind of the impact. Take a second, just kind of read through here. This was a fundamental time in the United States history to where we changed a lot of things, but at the same time we kept things the same. For everything that changes, things always stay the same. I mean, that's kind of a key thing to kind of take away from here. We expanded the democratic process. We helped get people, a lot more people involved in the process of electing officials, making sure that changes do actually happen in politics. But at the same time, in the era of Jim Crow laws and legalized disenfranchisement, of African American individuals was something that was actually happening, and it was legal. People were all for the situation to where you could basically say, yeah, prove that you can read. And you'd hold up a sign that says, point to your nose and eyes and ears and like see if they can do it. Because if they could read that, then they would know. And then, yeah, sure, we'll let you vote. Now, we'll get into institutionalized racism and talk about that a little bit later on, especially once we get into like the 1960s and that era, because that's a big thing. And like the Jim Crow's laws and like its connection to like IPS schools, it's insane how you can actually trace that history all the way up to the problems that IPS schools are even still trying to fix today. It's very alarming and kind of, okay, it's kind of the thinking, okay, what could have been if those types of laws had been struck down. But Plessy versus Ferguson, one of the cases to where our Supreme Court got it wrong, where they said separate but equal is, yep, that's all fine. It's kind of sickening. All right, but hopefully this kind of helps with like drawing in some of the big concepts and kind of connecting some of the themes. So kind of leaving you guys alone here, just kind of closing out by showing you this one more time. Oops. Okay, so how successful were progressive reforms with respect to the following: industrial conditions, urban life, and politics? So kind of think about that for a little bit. Then lastly, okay, evaluate the effectiveness of progressive era reformers, the federal government, in bringing about reform at the national level. Analyzes the successes and limitations of these efforts. Okay, so in terms of like going back and studying and reviewing and however you're going to tackle everything that you're responsible for this week, with our flipped weeks and everything else, and between now and next Thursday when we're moving on into the next chapter, which is World War I, kind of use these as kind of some guides, okay, to kind of make sure you break down through your reading the people who are involved in the progressive era. Then also think more thematically and holistically about these thematic points, okay? All right, guys, we will stop there. Hopefully this wasn't too terrible, and we will keep on pushing forward. Thanks, guys. Good luck.